Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. So here's my question for today. Are all harsh people narcissistic? You can go ahead and drop your answer to that in the comments, but are all people who are harsh narcissistic? Now I know I keep sharing videos about whether certain types of patterns that we observe in people may be indicative of narcissism or may lead people to believe that the other person is narcissistic. But I think it's important for us to make sure people are using the words properly, right? So let's take on this idea of harshness, that if a person is harsh, does that mean that they're narcissistic? So you can start in this video, just take a moment, pause it even if you need to. Think of the harsh people that you know and think about them throughout this video. And at the end of this video, I want you to reflect on this question again. Harshness is a complex kind of cluster of stuff in a person. Harsh people are abrupt, they tend to be unfiltered, they tend to be direct. It's very direct communication sometimes. I mean, for lack of a better way to put it, it's communication without lubrication. Without the little things we might say to someone to make difficult words a little easier to hear, a harsh person might say, "You weren't qualified, that's why you didn't get the job." A less harsh person would say, "We're glad you applied. It was great to meet you. We've had way more applicants than we had positions, and you did have a little less experience than many of our candidates, but we do hope it goes well. Thank you so much." Okay? Harshness, well, it's certainly efficient. It cuts to the quick. It can be a calling out of uncomfortable things. It can be a calling out of anything. It can be a commenting on things where many other people might tell you a white lie, the kind of, "You look great in that dress," versus, "Don't wear that dress. You look ridiculous. It's too young for you. It's inappropriate." Harshness can feel intrusive. It may even feel like a boundary violation, as though someone is just going in on you on topics that you may not feel comfortable hearing about or talking about or wanting their feedback about. Now, harshness is tricky because understanding the motivational elements of harshness can also cast some light on it. Different kinds of really direct people in life can be harsh. Teachers, coaches, military officers, bosses, doctors or healthcare professionals, therapists, colleagues, people who judge your work. Some of them may give unfiltered feedback and it may not land well. People close to us may be harsh as well. Parents, other family members, or friends. Harshness is very much a sort of interactive, interpersonal thing. Some people crumble when people are harsh with them. It can be enough to make a person never want to try something again, to quit something, to become sad or depressed or anxious. Some people actually do just fine with harshness. They just take the message, use the feedback, keep on keeping on. I don't know that anybody necessarily likes harshness. I just know that some people don't care, don't mind it, it doesn't register for them. They just view it as information. They may or may not like the information or feedback they are getting. They might be told, "You can't write, you're never going to play for the pros, you don't have what it takes to be a professional singer," whatever it is. But some people don't care and they'll receive the information as information, and the harshness may not affect them, right? But for people for whom that experience of harshness is painful, that experience of harshness can be brutal. It can take even a perfectly fine and warranted piece of feedback and make it really difficult to hear. There are likely to be multiple contributing factors as to why someone is able to better handle harshness. And these things can include temperament and personality, toxic relationship history or history of trauma, the stakes involved in the feedback, and some of this may be setting specific. Nobody expects a drill sergeant to be a teddy bear or a football coach to be a softie, but a harsh second grade teacher or a harsh therapist or a harsh healthcare provider, those may not be the best places for harshness when it can impact people who are uniquely vulnerable, aren't prepared for the harshness, and may be turning to that person for guidance or safety. people who grew up with harsh parents or other caregivers or family may go in one of two directions. They may either be habituated or accustomed to the harshness, and they may roll with it because it's what they know, or they may be even more rattled and triggered by it than other people because it had harmed them so much in the past. Now, sometimes harshness can in part be cultural. There are cultures in which more direct and abrupt communication is more normalized. And so, let's say if you're traveling in such a region of the world, you may be struck by the harshness. You may even experience it as rudeness. You may even find that even if you're not in that country, but you meet someone who originated from one of those cultures, that they may be more abrupt and it may feel harsh to you in terms of how they communicate about things with you. I'm going to own it. I'm just going to own my experience of harshness. I do not do well with harshness. I shut down. That's my freeze response whenever I'm around harsh people. And I know what it is about my history that contributes to it. If I meet harsh people, I'm at a point in my career I can choose. I won't work with them again, and I tend to disengage. I do fantastic with really warm and agreeable people. So I would have sucked at being a soldier or an athlete. But when I meet a warm and agreeable person, I will work around the clock to do good work with them. Like I said, I'm lucky. I'm at a stage in my career that if I meet a harsh person or have to do something with them, I won't do it again if it's possible. It was interesting. Just in the last couple of days, I talked to a very harsh receptionist. I always make it my point to start warm with folks, and she was very abrupt with me. And I adjusted, and I then kind of pulled back from my warmth. I made sure I had the facts she needed. I was very glad I had all my ducks in line because she would have not helped me if I hadn't, and she would have told me I was wrong and then ended it. I was glad when I did not need to deal with her again, right? Someone like her wouldn't have bothered some people. I have worked with some very harsh patients in the past, and I could see how their harshness and their abruptness was hurting their lives and the people around them in their lives. And I actually found it a little bit more challenging to be a clinician at those times. But once we dug in deeper with those clients, I find that harshness was related to different things. In some cases, early relational trauma, lifelong adversity, social anxiety, cultural factors. And as I got to know them, I saw the harshness as the defense it was, but it was still challenging. In the same breath, I can say I have friends who do great when they're working with harsh folks. Everyone is different. We just need to know ourselves. But the question is, does harsh mean narcissistic? And the answer is no. Some folks may argue that telling a person the hard truth and not holding back could be its own form of empathy before that person wastes more time. Maybe, but empathy may be a bit of a buzz cut in a harsh person. Harsh people may feel entitled. They say what they want, and maybe they feel they have the right to say it. But in some cases, they may say, it's what the position requires for me to just call it out, especially a dangerous or highly sensitive one where there may be no time to be warm and fuzzy. Harsh people are not necessarily seeking out validation or admiration. Harsh people may not be grandiose. Harsh people may not be arrogant. They may not even be controlling or even selfish. So really, the harshness kind of circles around the drain of marginal empathy, maybe a little bit of entitlement. That's not enough to call it narcissism. So we are back to the usual kind of statement when I make about these kinds of situations. I have to say almost all narcissistic people can be harsh, but definitely not all harsh people are narcissistic. Some folks may look back and remember a mentoring figure or a teaching or coaching figure from their lives who was harsh at the time and recall it as a difficult experience, but in retrospect, reflect on that experience with gratitude because it pushed them to be better, as though the harsh mentor saw that they could handle it. It also comes down to a person's level of social anxiety. The more socially anxious you are, the more difficult harshness will be. The more difficult harshness will be for you, because social anxiety often results in self-criticism and negative interpretation of social cues. So you can see how social harshness with a socially anxious person would be like throwing an incendiary device into their anxiety. Just because we don't like someone, because we find them abrasive or impulsive or unfiltered or even a little bit mean, that doesn't make them narcissistic. It may make them unpleasant. It may make them rude. It may make it so that we don't ask them for feedback or talk with them. But like I said, but not always. Like I said earlier in the video, harshness sometimes really fits the cultures of certain situations and jobs, and not everyone's bothered by it. So be very careful when you use this powerful word, narcissism, to imply things that it is not. Because harsh is harsh. That's it. And it's a descriptive word and tells us about the person. But that harsh person may also not be selfish or controlling or manipulative. In fact, their straight talk in some cases may mean that they're not at all manipulative. They just say what they believe fits the situation, and in fact, there's no game. If they think you're not interesting, they'll tell you. Frankly, I don't think a harsh person could actually, a harsh person who's not narcissistic, I don't think they could love bomb. Because a narcissistic person might be able to keep their harshness at bay long enough to love bomb you, and then it may appear during the devaluation phase. I just think a harsh person would call it straight from the beginning, and that's not going to seem that romantic. Listen, I don't struggle with harsh people because they're narcissistic. I'm just a little bit of a sensitive gal, and I do well with warmly given feedback. And when given a choice, I'm not going to hang in the harsh end of the swimming pool. However, I've gotten to know some harsh folks pretty well. And while I found them a bit abrupt and caustic and difficult, in my experience, at least most of the harsh people I know didn't need to be admired. They didn't have grandiose fantasies, and they weren't selfish. They're just harsh. In some cases, I got to know their children, who told me, I'm very aware of how harsh my parent is. But they didn't view their parent as narcissistic. They're like, yeah, my parent was harsh. They always showed up. They did make us a priority. They never needed to be on a stage. If their parents were narcissistic, the impacts on these adult children would likely have been very different. The only way for us to really have this conversation about how narcissism affects us is by knowing what it is and knowing what it is not. And the lack of reciprocity between certain qualities can muddy the waters. Over time, like I said, almost every narcissistic person will be harsh, but many harsh people are not narcissistic. You may not like harsh people, but not everyone we dislike is toxic or narcissistic. Listen, we all like different people, and we all have different preferences for different ways of being. So what's the verdict on those harsh people you know, narcissistic or not? None of this is simple. I hope that's helpful, and thanks again.